Welcome to the podcast summary of astrology. Astrology has been around for a very long time, and it didn't start as a punchline or a meme. It grew out of practical sky watching, traveled across empires and languages, stayed entwined with early astronomy for centuries, and even now it holds real cultural power despite a long record of empirical failure. So this is a story about two things at once: how people built meaning from the sky, and why that meaning has proved so durable even when the evidence doesn't cooperate. At the beginning, this was about survival as much as symbolism. Human beings were tracking lunar and seasonal cycles tens of thousands of years ago, and those observations mattered for timekeeping, planting, movement, and ritual. Over time, watching the sky became more than a calendar. Celestial events started to be read as signs, ways of interpreting what the gods might be saying and what might happen on Earth. The oldest full astrological system is usually linked to First Dynasty Babylonian records from roughly 1950 to 1651 BCE. Much later, horoscopic astrology took shape in Hellenistic Alexandria, where Babylonian, Egyptian, and Greek traditions mixed together into something closer to the chart-based astrology people recognize now. And like a lot of influential knowledge systems, it traveled through conquest, trade, and translation. From Mesopotamia, it moved into Greece and Rome, then through Persian and Islamic scholarly centers, and eventually into medieval Europe through Arabic to Latin translations. One thing that's easy to forget from a modern viewpoint is that astrology and astronomy were not always cleanly separated. For a long stretch of history, astrology was treated as a serious learned discipline connected to medicine, meteorology, alchemy, and politics. Court astrologers weren't fringe figures. Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, and Galileo all worked in that world, even when they criticized parts of astrological practice. The same people could be doing careful astronomical observation and also casting charts for patrons. The split happened gradually. By the 17th century, heliocentrism, Newtonian mechanics, and the rise of the scientific method changed the way educated people thought about cause and effect in the cosmos. That's why historians usually urge a little caution here. Calling ancient astrology a pseudoscience can miss the point if you strip it out of its original context. In its own time, it functioned as a serious form of astral knowledge, not as a failed imitation of modern physics. None of that means everybody bought it. Astrology has had smart, forceful critics since antiquity. Carneades and Cicero raised questions that still sound familiar. If the stars determine human lives, what happens to free will, moral responsibility, and plain old common sense? And if birth timing matters so much, why do twins born almost together often turn out very differently? Critics also pointed to other obvious influences on life: heredity, parenting, medicine, weather, circumstance. In other words, even before modern statistics, people could see that human outcomes have a lot of moving parts. Later thinkers pushed from different angles. Sextus Empiricus and Plotinus challenged the logic and mechanism. Avicenna raised philosophical objections. And Martin Luther and Catholic theologians worried about the theological implications of letting celestial patterns govern human destiny. In more modern terms, the argument isn't just that predictions sometimes miss. Some critics say astrology is unfalsifiable, and Thomas Kuhn's take was that astrologers didn't develop an empirically progressive research program. Failures tended to get explained away rather than used to rebuild the theory. Once astrology was tested under controlled conditions, the results were not kind to it. The famous example is Sean Carlson's 1985 double-blind study in Nature, done with input from both physicists and astrologers. That study found natal chart interpretations performed no better than chance. And Carlson said, the tested astrological hypothesis was clearly refuted. Another case that gets brought up a lot is Michel Gauquelin's so-called Mars effect, the claim that Mars's position correlated with athletic success. But a later French study failed to replicate it, and the original findings were criticized for selective sampling. There was even a very human possible explanation in the mix. Some parents may have altered reported birth times to produce more favorable astrological charts. People have always been willing to nudge destiny with paperwork, apparently. Beyond those headline cases, larger tests looked at more than 100 cognitive, behavioral, and physical variables, and a meta-analysis covering over 700 astrologers and more than 1,000 birth charts also found no significant evidence that astrologers could match charts correctly or produce interpretations better than chance. And yet, astrology persists, which makes more sense once you look at the psychology. A lot of its persuasive power can be explained by confirmation bias. People remember the reading that felt eerily accurate and quietly forget the misses. Broad statements can also feel deeply personal, especially when they line up with something you're already feeling. That's especially relevant for the horoscope most people actually encounter, which is sun sign astrology. It uses only the zodiac sign of the sun, basically one small slice of what a full astrological chart is supposed to include. So the statements are broad enough to land on a lot of people. Sociologist Marcello Truzzi drew a useful distinction here. Some people read horoscopes casually, some turn to astrology for advice, and a smaller group treats it as a full worldview. For that last group, astrology isn't mainly competing with a lab experiment. It offers meaning, identity, and a sense of cosmic belonging, which is a different kind of need entirely. Astrology lost academic legitimacy during the Enlightenment, but popular culture never fully let it go. It surged back from the 19th century onward through spiritualism, New Age thought, newspaper horoscopes, and then the internet did what the internet does and made it constant, portable, and very shareable. A 2024 Pew survey found that 27% of U.S. adults believe in astrology, and in the late 2010s, astrology apps pulled in millions of dollars in Silicon Valley investment, which is its own little alignment of stars. It has also shown up in high-stakes settings. Nancy Reagan secretly consulted astrologer Joan Quigley after the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, and British intelligence once used Louis de Wohl in hopes of anticipating Hitler's actions, though his predictions were reportedly so poor that he was called a charlatan. Even without scientific validity, the social effects can be very real. In Japan, belief that girls born in the 1966 Firehorse year would bring bad luck contributed to a drop of more than 25% in births as families tried to avoid that outcome. That's maybe the clearest reminder that ideas do not need to be scientifically true to be historically powerful. If enough people organize their choices around them, the consequences are real anyway. So astrology's story isn't just about whether a birth chart works. It's about how knowledge travels, how old systems keep their emotional grip, and how people keep looking upward for pattern, reassurance, and meaning. The evidence says astrology doesn't do what it claims in a scientific sense. But as a cultural force, it's still very much here. And that part doesn't require Mercury to be in anything at all. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.